Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Good evening from Westminster on another day of extraordinary drama over Brexit. Despite days of assurances that the crucial vote on the withdrawal agreement would go ahead tomorrow night, Theresa May has cancelled it for now, admitting that the deal would be rejected and by a significant margin. At the heart of the turmoil, the controversial backstop arrangement, the insurance policy to stop a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic if no trade deal can be worked out. Theresa May told MPs she is going back to Brussels and will talk to other EU leaders to try to secure additional reassurances on the backstop, but she said there is no deal available without it. The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn said if she cannot renegotiate a better deal, she should resign. Tonight, there is no new date for a vote. Our first report this evening is from our political editor, Laura Kunsberg.
The landmarks look the same, but these are extraordinary days this place will remember. On the Prime Minister's most important plan, the Brexit compromise that's taken more than 2 years, Theresa May simply didn't have the MPs to back her, so instead, the Prime Minister backed down.
If we went ahead and held the vote tomorrow, the deal would be rejected by a significant margin. We will therefore defer the vote scheduled for tomorrow and not proceed to divide the House at this time.
In other words, she knew she would lose, so there'll be no vote tomorrow. Instead, she's appealing to the rest of the EU to look again at the most controversial part of the agreement, the backstop.
I spoke to a number of EU leaders over the weekend, and in advance of the European Council, I will go to see my counterparts in other member states and the leadership of the Council and the Commission. I will discuss with them the clear concerns that this House has expressed. We are also looking closely at new ways of empowering the House of Commons to ensure that any provision for a backstop has democratic legitimacy.
The Cabinet can nod along, but was the Commons really listening? Is it realistic to reckon she'll ever get the support she really needs?
I still believe there is a majority to be won in this House in support of it, if I can secure additional reassurance on the question of the backstop. And that is what my focus will be in the days ahead. But, Mr. Speaker, if you take a step back, it is clear that this House faces a much more fundamental question. Does this House want to deliver Brexit?
That's the sound of the divide in here. Dozens of MPs wish none of this was happening. Dozens on the other side wish we'd left already.
If the House does it want to do so through reaching an agreement with the EU? If the answer is yes, and I believe that is the answer of the majority of this House, then we all have to ask ourselves whether we're prepared to make a compromise. I am determined to do all I can to secure the reassurances this House requires, to get this deal over the line and deliver for the British people, and I commend this statement to the House.
But the government's efforts to compromise have led them to a crisis.
The government has lost control of events and is in complete disarray. It's been evident for weeks that the Prime Minister's deal did not have the confidence of this House. Yet she ploughed on regardless, reiterating this is the only deal available. This is a bad deal for Britain, a bad deal for our economy and a bad deal for our democracy. Our country deserves better than this.
Even the Speaker furious that the government's dropping a major vote like this.
Halting the debate after no fewer than 164 colleagues have taken the trouble to contribute will be thought by many members of this House to be deeply discourteous.
But that procedural palaver was nothing compared to the onslaught for the Prime Minister from all sides.
But does she not realise that every time she comes back here with her tail between her legs, she humiliates the British people?
I put it to her that she's lost the trust and credibility of the House, lost the trust and credibility of the country, and most importantly, she's lost the trust and credibility of the European Union.
Does she not realise how chaotic and ridiculous this makes our country look?
The fiasco today, the government has really lost all authority.
The Prime Minister has been forced to pull tomorrow's vote in a stunning display of pathetic cowardice.
We have found an impasse in this House. It's time now to take this back to the people and have a people's vote.
Mrs. Thatcher had a word for it. What she's done today, F-R-I-T, she's frit.
Far from being frit, I think this Prime Minister has great courage in coming back.
This afternoon, all the more agonising for the Prime Minister, because this morning, Cabinet Ministers were making the case for cracking on.
Is the vote definitely 100% going to happen?
Yes.
Tomorrow?
The Prime Minister has been clear the vote's going ahead, and I believe it should.
Should it go ahead? I certainly hope so. The Prime Minister's confirmed that.
Leaving ministers obviously angry, stuck for explanation.
It's all moving so quickly.
It is all moving so quickly. So as far as we understand it, the vote is being delayed. What do you think of that decision?
I can see the logic of it. Obviously, we will all need to work out what that then leads to. But, you know, I keep on saying to my colleagues, and I don't think I can say it enough, beware of stepping into an abyss of chaos.
It's the Prime Minister that's pushing things into chaos, though. She's the one who's delayed the vote after saying again and again it was going to happen. Even this morning, Cabinet Ministers were saying it was going ahead.
Every single time she's tried to negotiate something, the ERG, you know, the Conservative group in Parliament, have boxed her in this way, boxed her in that way, told her to flex her muscles and narrowed down her negotiating options. So they are the ones, I think, who have laid the ground for the wrecking we're now seeing.
But if the Prime Minister's banking on the EU making changes, it doesn't sound promising. Not at all.
The withdrawal agreement, including the Irish backstop, is the only agreement on the table. It took over a year and a half to negotiate. It has the support of 28 governments, and it's not possible to reopen any aspect of that agreement without reopening all aspects of it.
For weeks, the chatter in this circus has been about winning the arguments. But tonight, Theresa May's enemies might claim she's losing her nerve. Laura Kunzberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, emotions are running high both inside and outside Parliament. After a weekend of frantic phone calls to EU leaders, Theresa May says that they are open to discussions on the backstop arrangement, but she was emphatic in the Commons that a backstop was necessary for a Brexit deal. So how much room for manoeuvre does she have, and how likely is it that EU leaders will give any ground on the deal that they have all agreed on? Our Europe editor Katya Adler has been watching reaction from the rest of the EU.
It was business as usual in EU HQ. No sense of the turmoil we witnessed in the UK today. Yes, the decision to postpone the Brexit vote got EU tongues wagging, but they feel their main role in the Brexit deal is done. EU big guns were glaringly absent from the podium today.
As President Juncker said,
it was business as usual in EU HQ. No sense of the turmoil we witnessed in the UK today. Yes, the decision to postpone the main sticking point for the UK in the Brexit deal remains the guarantee over the Irish border. It's called a backstop, agreed by Theresa May and EU leaders to avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland if no EU-UK trade deal is already in place. Critics don't like the backstop because it keeps the UK tied to EU customs regulations, prevents the UK from making its own trade deals, and the UK needs the EU's go-ahead to get out of the backstop once it's triggered. At a meeting in Brussels today, Ireland's Deputy Prime Minister was keen to point out that neither the UK nor the EU was keen to trigger the backstop.
It is a last resort insurance mechanism that only kicks in if we are unable to resolve the border issues through negotiating a comprehensive future relationship, which everybody believes is possible.
Despite pressure from UK MPs and today's cancelled vote in the House of Commons, there's no evidence the EU is wavering in its support for EU member Ireland and the Irish border issue. Take a look at this slightly exasperated tweet today from the Brexit negotiator for the European Parliament. Just keep in mind, he says, that we will never let the Irish down. The decision to delay the Brexit vote in Parliament, while dramatic in the UK, actually changes very little here in the EU. Of course, EU leaders want that deal to pass. They want to avoid a no-deal Brexit. So they're open now to hearing from the Prime Minister what she needs from them, up to a point. Reassurances on the backstop? That shouldn't be a problem, but a renegotiation, absolutely not, is very much the mood here tonight. Theresa May's Europe advisor Ollie Robbins was snapped arriving here in Brussels this afternoon. The Prime Minister herself will soon follow. The EU awaits. And the EU won't have to wait for long, because we've just heard from the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, that he is calling a special EU summit on Brexit this Thursday. He said this will absolutely not be a renegotiation of the Brexit deal, of the withdrawal agreement, but he said it will be the EU leaders having a look at how they can facilitate the passing of the Brexit deal through the House of Commons, so looking at the concerns raised by the Prime Minister today. In a separate development here today, we've also had a ruling from the European Court of Justice. It has ruled that if the UK government, or if Parliament so chooses, it can unilaterally withdraw from Brexit, just cancel Brexit. This was a case that had been brought by anti-Brexit MPs. However, it hasn't caused that many waves in EU circles. The EU's never hidden the fact that it would like the UK to stay in the EU, but as things stand, it expects the UK to be leaving. It expects Brexit to take place. It wants to help the Prime Minister get this Brexit deal through without compromising the EU's basic red lines. Sophie.
Europe editor Katia Adler in Brussels, thank you. So what now? No new date has been given for a vote, though there is speculation that it may now be delayed for weeks. What can the Prime Minister achieve, though, in that time, given that Parliament is so bitterly divided on this issue? Here's our deputy political editor, John Pienaar, on what might happen next.
Well, Theresa May's retreated, listened to cabinet colleagues and advisers urging her to delay the vote on her Brexit plan. Why? That's easy. The signs were that she was, and maybe still is, facing a crushing defeat in the Commons, a lethal combination of Tory Brexiteers who say her deal could leave the UK locked into EU rules, along with the DUP, who also hate the idea of Northern Ireland being tied even closer than mainland Britain for the sake of avoiding a hard Irish border. Then there are the former Tory Remainers who see no point leaving the EU only to follow its rules with no say in writing them. Now Mrs May's off back to Brussels, but as we've heard, significant new concessions seem remote. So what's next? The political perils facing Mrs May are still there, still waiting. Her cabinet is split. Some ministers privately want what they call a managed no deal. Leave the EU before any trade deals in place if necessary, but with time to prepare and avoid as much disruption as possible. Critics insist leaving with no deal would carry a heavy economic price. Others in the cabinet privately want a softer Brexit, the Norway solution, with shared customs rules thrown in and with free movement of people, though with some control over migration. There's also talk among ministers and MPs of consulting Parliament on what deal it would be prepared to support. Most MPs are pro-European, so that might lead to a soft Brexit. And thanks to the European Court, Britain could stop the clock on Brexit while it decides. The hard Brexiteers would absolutely hate that. It would split the Tories, maybe Labour too, and there's no guarantee Theresa May would survive as Prime Minister. The hugely controversial notion of using a fresh referendum to break the deadlock now has supporters in both main parties. They're growing confident they might, just might, get their way in the end. Labour split too. Some MPs want a soft Brexit, but the party wants a general election. Could Labour win a vote of no confidence against the government? Unlikely, since at least some Tory MPs and the DUP would need to side against the Prime Minister. Would Tory MPs force a vote of no confidence on Mrs May as Conservative Party leader? Well, a lot of them are angry enough, and though Mrs May might win that vote, if she did, she'd be safe in the job for a year. And Conservative MPs may just consider that's too long a lease on number 10, and it's time for someone else to take on the political mission impossible that Brexit almost seems to have become.
John Pienaar there. Well, I'm joined now by our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg. Such a huge climb down for the Prime Minister today. What now?
Well, there are lots of questions we're simply not able to be answered tonight, Sophie. But the first thing I think to remember is clearly the Prime Minister has made a calculation here that what would have been worse, what would have been more humiliating would have been to push this to a vote in that place tomorrow night and maybe to go down by 100 votes or maybe 150 votes and have a defeat that she would not have been able to survive from. However, in terms of what she does now, I don't get any sense that there is a grand plan here. Clearly what the government is going to try to do is to get some kind of tinkering around the edges, some verbal or political gymnastics from the European Union that might at least show to her angry MPs that she has tried and tried and tried again. That might possibly put over a few more people back to supporting her deal when it returns. But it may not return until after the Christmas break. We may be looking at weeks and weeks before MPs are asked to give their verdict on this deal again. And it's not really clear tonight why Theresa May thinks she will be able to have a more persuasive case. And many MPs are so dug into this position, they're almost in a frenzy and very, very much committed to trying to defeat her Brexit compromise. But there's absolutely nothing certain about the Prime Minister giving us a bit more time and somehow therefore being in control of events. But a difficult set of calculations, but she's clearly decided that today, to delay, was to survive for another while.
Laura, for now, thank you.
So, caught between defeat and a hard place, Theresa May has called off the vote on her Brexit deal and will, despite EU refusals, bid to renegotiate the issue which is tearing her party apart, the Northern Ireland backstop. For days, Theresa May and a phalanx of cabinet ministers have told us this renegotiation was impossible. Europe still agrees and says it's not negotiating anything. Donald Tusk warning tonight, as time is running out, they would begin preparing for a no-deal scenario. Jeremy Corbyn said it showed the Prime Minister had lost control of events, while other MPs accused her of cowardice. Political editor Gary Gibbon is with me now. Gary, so no deal?
This is an extraordinary humiliation for the Prime Minister, as you were saying. She was saying only a few moments ago that this wasn't going to happen, that the vote was going to happen on her deal. One of the questions she keeps dodging in the statement she's just finished in the House of Commons is, so when you're delaying this until? I understand very much the tenor of the Cabinet conference call that happened today was that this was being pushed the other side of Christmas into January. What is she possibly going to come back with when she goes to Europe? Well, she was quite clear in the House of Commons. She was talking about coming back with reassurances. So that means words. She's been clear in talking to cabinet ministers privately as well. She's not talking about opening up the treaties, the legal text. And as you said, in Brussels, Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council, very clear as well, saying those texts will not be cleared up. So what can she possibly come back with? Tonight, ERG supporters, the European Research Group, the pro-Brexit group and the party are saying she's going to come back with something that'll be even worse than David Cameron's renegotiation. Another one said it was going to be like Chamberlain's piece of paper she'd come back with. I'm not sure which has more infamy in those circles. At their meeting tonight, they were talking about putting in more letters to try and get a vote of no confidence in her. If this was all intended, as it seems, really, fundamentally, to buy her some time, the great question is, does she really get time at the end of this? Here's how the day went here.
Theresa May had warned chaos and uncertainty would follow a Commons defeat. Turns out you can get there without that.
We'll be voting tomorrow evening on the withdrawal agreement.
The Prime Minister's confirmed that, so I look forward to supporting her as it goes ahead tomorrow.
Which is 100% happening on Tuesday.
It is. Right up until late this morning, Theresa May had sent remaining government loyalists into studios to promise the vote would happen tomorrow at 7.
Theresa May has pulled the vote!
Then, suddenly, ministers deployed to defend the line found it had changed.
The vote is definitely off. Alan Duncan, as a member of the government, what do you say? Is that it?
In a telephone conference call with Cabinet, Theresa May said she was postponing the vote and then told MPs the same.
I've listened very carefully to what has been said in this chamber and out of it. To what has been said in this chamber and out of it by members from all sides. From listening to those views, it is clear that while there is broad support for many of the key aspects of the deal, on one issue, the Northern Ireland backstop, there remains widespread and deep concern. As a result, if we went ahead and held the vote tomorrow, the deal would be rejected by a significant margin. We will therefore defer the vote scheduled for tomorrow and not proceed to divide the House at this time.
The Speaker reprimanded the government for pulling the vote so late. He said it should reconsider.
Let us see if those who have assured this House and the public over and over and over again that this supremely important vote is going to take place tomorrow without fail wish to rise to the occasion.
The government didn't respond. The Labour leader mocked Theresa May's attempt to get assurances from the EU rather than substantial changes to the deal.
The Prime Minister is trying to buy herself one last chance to save this deal. If she doesn't take on board the fundamental changes required, then she must make way for those who can.
The Prime Minister is promising something better 6 days after she said there was nothing better.
And don't let anyone here think that there's a better deal to be won by shouting louder. Don't imagine that if we vote this down, a different deal is going to miraculously appear. But I am clear, from what I have heard in this place and from my own conversations, that these elements do not offer a sufficient number of colleagues the reassurance that they need. I spoke to a number of EU leaders over the weekend, and in advance of the European Council, I will go to see my counterparts in other member states and the leadership of the Council and the Commission.
Theresa May said she would seek reassurances from EU leaders. Cabinet ministers say she is not expecting to open up the draft treaty itself.
She's going to go and say, can I have some different concessions? But really, nobody here is seriously thinking that there are going to be meaningful concessions without some very unpalatable strings attached.
The Prime Minister has been forced to pull tomorrow's vote in a stunning display of pathetic cowardice. The vote tomorrow night would have shown the will of this House, but this government is focused on saving the Prime Minister's job. And yet we still, even now, don't even know when she wants to bring this vote back, or even what she wants the deal to be. Does she not realise how chaotic and ridiculous this makes our country look?
She's lost the trust and credibility of the House, lost the trust and credibility of the country, and most importantly, she's lost the trust and credibility of the European Union.
I want to ask the Prime Minister if she thinks that going back and changing minutiae about the backstop is actually going to make any difference to the kind of people on her side who like to go around calling themselves Aslan and circling around her head, caring nothing about this country, but only about their own position.
The thing that is changing is the view of the British people.
No, it's not. It's not. Wrong.
I know it's nearly the pantomime season, but oh yes, it has.
A rare moment of levity in a tense debate. Many of Theresa May's staunchest pro-Brexit critics skipped the event. They're plotting, one cabinet minister said. They smell blood. Delay was meant to buy time, but may not even be able to buy that.
I don't.
Well, we're now joined by 3 MPs. Nicky Morgan, who supports a second referendum.
But I don't.
You don't, but I'll come
But
and you can clarify that.
That's incorrect.
Well, let me just do the other and I'll come back.
All right.
That wasn't me who said that. Now, Richard Burgon and Andrew Bridgen, a Eurosceptic from the Conservative European Research Group. Now, Nicky Morgan, you're not supporting, so let's not go there. But what I am asking you is, how much of a political sacrifice do you believe you've made in order to support Mrs May on this deal?
Well, I think we've all had to make sacrifices. We all should make sacrifices because actually what the country now needs is some calm leadership to get to the right place, to try to start to build a consensus and to heal some divisions. It's all very febrile here and very excitable and very good. I understand for the broadcast and everything else, but this is not actually
it's not just
what people
It's not just excitability. This is a dark moment for British politics.
Well, it's a very, very serious moment, and actually we all ought to reflect on that. And this is, I think
but you're
people
going
in
to
the
continue
country
to support her come hell or high water.
Well, I think that actually the deal the Prime Minister's put on the table is something that should be supported. I hope very much she should be able to go to Brussels, perhaps get some further movement or something, and then be able to bring the agreement back and get it approved, because that's what the country needs.
Richard Burton, you're a Corbynite, effectively. Now, we can't thank Labour for anything in any of this, can we? What part has your party really played in bringing us to this point?
Well, we argued for a meaningful vote, we argued for the necessary transition period, and we also argued that all EU citizens living here should get the right and the security to stay here. So we've led the debate in many ways. But what we've got today is a government running away from democracy. They lost 3 votes last week, they tried to hide legal evidence last week, they were found in contempt of Parliament last week, and now they've actually pulled a vote on the defining negotiated deal of this Prime Minister. People out there aren't excited, people out there are worried.
Well, if we were to ask people out there what Mr Corbyn thinks and what he's ever said about what's going on, they wouldn't know.
Well, they would, because Jeremy and the Labour Party have been clear.
No, Jeremy Corbyn himself.
Jeremy Corbyn has been clear.
Virtually silent.
What he's talked about is a common sense Brexit deal, which actually bring the country together, and with a permanent customs union, a strong single market relationship, and protections for workers' rights, environmental protections, consumer rights, can actually not only command the support of the majority of the House of Commons, actually bring people together.
All very well.
Both people who voted Leave and people who voted Remain.
All very well, but basically Labour have played no part in this. Has been an internal Tory struggle, and you have made no headway whatever because you could not tell the country what you actually think.
No, we would have defeated the government in this vote today on Theresa May's rotten deal, and that's why the government have pulled it. If it wasn't for effective opposition from Labour trying to bring Leavers and Remainers today, we wouldn't have the Tory party having to put 2 people up to represent their view, one on one side and the other on the other.
Well, I could have put 2 people up to represent your views too.
No, the Labour Party is united in opposition to Theresa May's worst of all worlds deal.
Unfortunately, we never learnt what the Labour Party actually wants of our relationship with Europe.
A permanent customs union, a strong single market relationship, and a guarantee that there'll be no reduction in workers' rights, consumer protections, or in environmental rights.
What is that? I mean, what is it? Is it the Norway? Is it Canada? Is it what?
No, but it's a
doing nothing to achieve that.
It's a bespoke deal for the UK, and Britain certainly deserves better than the shambles that we're being offered today.
Right, Andrew Bridgen, you're right on the right-hand wing of the Conservative Party. What have you done to bring today about?
Well, I think we've tried to avoid it. I mean, from the moment the Chequers proposals were put forward, I've explained to the Prime Minister that that is no basis for an agreement with the European Union for a future relationship that's going to get support in the House. The Prime Minister hasn't listened to me and lots of colleagues, which has sadly led us to today.
But you haven't given her an inch. You've never given her anything, nothing. What have you given her?
Well, what we've given is solutions to the Irish border, which are there to be seen for anyone who wants to see them. And also, Donald Tusk offered us a free trade agreement, a super Canada deal, which would fulfil the mandate we were given to deliver the Brexit the British people voted for, is the best economic outcome and the best sovereign outcome for our Parliament. But the Prime Minister's ignored all of that and has brought us to today.
Right,
she's just jammed the handbrake on as she's faced the brick wall.
Well, we're now in a very, very bad place. Well, both government and politics in Britain have collapsed. So the question is, what are you going to do to rebuild them?
I'm not sure that the Prime Minister can go and get the deal.
So you want her out?
I put my letter in July. Lots of colleagues have. I think we're heading for a vote of confidence.
Never 48, however. Never the necessary 48. And you said you had them and you didn't.
Well, if not now, when is the question?
There is one thing where you probably must have some kind of common ground with them, and that is that Mrs May's authority is shot.
Well, I do think that the Prime Minister is in a very difficult position now, and unfortunately
That's a
it's become...
beautiful way of saying it, but is it shot?
Well, I wouldn't say that, because the honest truth is that a leadership contest at the moment for the Conservative Party to inflict not only this current situation, but also a leadership contest on the country now, I honestly think that your viewers and the rest of the country will be thinking we have taken complete leave of our senses. Now, there is no doubt, I think the Prime Minister will have to set a date for her departure sooner rather than later in order to win people over to back either her deal or something approximated that, or perhaps a plan B, which I have been advocating, which is a UK-Norway-type arrangement, I think a parliamentary consensus can be built. But I think that actually to change horses at this stage and to inflict even more uncertain situation would be wrong.
But that's actually what you want to do, isn't it, Richard Burton? You want a general election. You want to get Jeremy Corbyn elected. Why didn't you try and do it today?
Well, our first priority is to stop Theresa May's rotten deal and also to stop a disastrous no-deal Brexit. But of course we want a general election, not only to negotiate a new deal with Europe, but to negotiate a new deal on behalf of people who have been attacked by this ruthless Conservative government and have had their public services attacked too.
You don't even dare call a motion of no confidence in the Prime Minister.
Well, we were talking about bringing a motion of no confidence.
About, but not doing it.
When the Prime Minister loses her vote on her rotten deal. She's kicked the can down the road. It's merely delaying the inevitable. She hasn't yet lost that vote. I believe she will do in due course, because she hasn't got the credibility as a negotiator to negotiate anything better with the European Union. And that's why she should move aside so we can.
Labour is definitely going to call a motion of no confidence. It's just a matter of time.
We'll be pursuing the government, and a motion of no confidence, I'm in favour of bringing one when it's most likely we'll win it. And actually bringing it before the government and before Theresa May has lost her vote would seem strange. Nobody was expecting us to bring it this morning, for example, before the vote was scheduled to take place. The vote hasn't taken place, but she's merely kicked the can down the road and bought herself a few more days or a few more weeks as Prime Minister.
My understanding is that the Speaker gave you an opportunity to start a process of calling a vote on that vote.
Well, we'll be bringing action in Parliament in order...
Tomorrow?
When we have the best chance of winning it.
Well, that could be next year.
Well, let's see what the Prime Minister comes back with. Anybody knows that one of the most important things in negotiations, whether you're a trade union negotiator, a business negotiator or a political negotiator, is to have credibility. Because she doesn't even have the confidence of her own party, she is not a credible negotiator. This government is not credible. Right. They need to move aside for someone who can get that better deal.
Richard Burton, are you prepared to call a motion of no confidence? And if so, when?
I'm not going to call a vote of no confidence in the government. I'm thinking...
the ERG, your group, Mr Mogg and the rest.
I think we'll have a vote of confidence in the Prime Minister, which is, don't conflate that with a vote of confidence in the government. I would resist that.
Andrew, sorry, I should have got you too muddled up in terms of Christian names, but surely you can't just separate the Prime Minister from the government.
That's normal procedure.
Well, which is more important, keeping your party in power or getting the deal you want?
Well, getting the deal we want and keeping Jeremy Corbyn out of power is the most important thing for our country. Whatever anyone thinks about the disruption of no deal, the disruption of having Jeremy Corbyn and his far-left policies running our country is far, far greater, and everyone in business knows that.
Andrew Burton, Richard Burton and Nicky Morgan, thank you very much indeed. Apologies for the slight interruption down there, but that's democracy. That's it. Now over to Cathy, who's in the House of Commons. Cathy.
Thanks, John. Well, here in the Commons, the debate and with it MPs' chance to vote on Theresa May's deal just now will be brought to a halt within the next half an hour, just over half an hour, by the Chief Whip with a single word: tomorrow. Well, earlier, Labour has been discussing the idea of forming some kind of minority government or trying to force a general election with the SNP. So with me now to discuss that is the Westminster leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford. Some reticence from Jeremy Corbyn, the idea of tabling a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. If he won't, will you?
Well, I think we need to reflect on this position that we're in. We have a government in chaos, a government that lost 3 votes last week, the first time in 40 years that a government's lost 3 votes in a day.
So the perfect opportunity for an opposition party to take a vote?
Because where we're at, we should have been voting tomorrow night on the meaningful vote that Parliament voted for. So once again, we've got a government that's in contempt of Parliament. We've got the Prime Minister that's running away from this because she knows that her deal, which doesn't have support, is going to be defeated. Any idea that she's going to be able to remove or fix the backstop in discussions with the EU is simply fanciful.
So I can take that as a yes, that you would table a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister.
I'm asking Jeremy Corbyn to do that in the first instance.
And if he doesn't?
Jeremy is the leader of the opposition. We have the option to do so. I think it's far better that Labour take that initiative. If it's not the case, we have to make sure that at the right time that we are prepared, if necessary, to take appropriate action. But this is a government that's got to be held to account. We need to remember we're talking about jobs, we're talking about the future of Scotland and the whole of the UK, and this is a government which is in crisis.
And we're also talking about democracy. Millions of people voted for Brexit. How would a Labour SNP minority government do any better than Theresa May has done in delivering that deal?
Our first priority is to protect the interests of the people of Scotland. And there is no such thing as a good Brexit. People were not told the truth in 2016, and it's perfectly right and proper. Now that we have more information on any Brexit scenario, jobs are going to be lost, people are going to be poorer. And I've said on a number of occasions that all members of Parliament have got a responsibility to look after the interests of their constituents. Based on the information that we have now, we need to go back to the people, present them with the information and allow them to have that choice of staying in the EU. And myself and the First Minister have said Scotland will not be dragged out. So there are clear red lines that have been crossed in this that we need to deal with.
And let's just look at other powers that you might have at your disposal. Could MPs, for example, instruct the government to revoke Article 50? Is that something that is possible constitutionally?
Well, today's been a good day in as far as we've had the judgment from the European Court of Justice that the government can revoke Article 50. Parliament's got to take back control, and we should be instructing government, instructing the Prime Minister that we are now in a crisis. What we need to do in the short term is make sure we put off leaving the European Union. The best thing to do would be to revoke Article 50 in order that a vote can take place of all the people in the country. We can present them with a vision of the UK staying in on the exact same terms that we have at the moment. That's called leadership.
Ian Blackford, thank you very much for joining us. Well, within the last hour, the European Council President Donald Tusk has said EU leaders will discuss Brexit at an EU summit on Thursday. He declared, "We will not renegotiate the deal, including the backstop, but we are ready to discuss how to facilitate UK ratification." Our Europe editor, Matt Fry, is in Strasbourg. Matt.
Well, Cathy, I'm at the European Parliament here in Strasbourg, and I have to say this is really quite a quiet and sedate place. And one of the sounds you heard today was the sound of people gasping and watching the debate in the House of Commons. Remember, this place used to admire the mother of all parliaments with its cut and thrust and its rough and tumble. Well, today they really think that this has become a mother of all messes. And like everyone in London here, they are wondering, where do we go from here? Because when Theresa May comes to Brussels tomorrow for her urgent talks with Donald Tusk, she herself has said that she doesn't want to renegotiate the deal. Donald Tusk and just about everyone in every language in the European Union has said there will be no renegotiation of the deal. There'll just be a clarification of what's already in the divorce papers, as it were. No one here can see whether that is actually enough to talk the ERG away from their position, to talk any MPs who are opposed to Mrs May's deals away from their current position. So where do we go from here? We're literally facing the unknown, and of course that is terribly relevant in the UK, but also that's not what they want here as well. They don't want a disorderly Brexit or a no-deal Brexit. That would be very bad news in Strasbourg and Brussels. Now, I've got two guests with me today. Mairead McGuinness is the Vice President of the European Parliament, and Philip Lamberts is Head of the Greens in the European Parliament. Welcome to you both. First of all, what is your reaction to what you saw today? Because you were watching the television, weren't you?
We're all glued to the House of Commons, even though we've business to do here. I suppose it's another part of this unfolding story where instead of certainty, there is more uncertainty. The word that struck me from listening to the Prime Minister was reassurance, that the UK colleagues want reassurance. Well, I think we also want reassurance here that the deal which was brokered in honour with the British Prime Minister and the European Union will be honoured. And I hope that those reassurances she seeks will be enough to convince those who are so much against this agreement that they should support it.
But the reason why the deal has faltered is mainly because of the backstop. It's because of the Irish issue. Do you think that Ireland should be doing more to help Theresa May? Because if this deal doesn't happen, the no-deal scenario is a real possibility, and then you get a hard border on the island of Ireland.
Yeah, but let's pull back here a bit. The European Union is committed to the situation of no hard border on the island of Ireland, and that's extremely important to us, and so is the British Prime Minister. And therefore, the idea that we help, of course we want to support to get this agreed so we have an orderly Brexit, but there can be no backsliding on this, absolutely no backsliding, no renegotiation, and I hope, Philippe, you will also make that point very clearly, that in terms of this Parliament, Parliament here is fully behind the backstop. And also, the United Kingdom didn't want a Northern Ireland specific backstop. The Prime Minister proposed what she got. So it's quite difficult to know what else we can do.
Philip Lambert, let me put this to you. The ECJ, that was the other big news today out of Luxembourg, ruled that the United Kingdom can unilaterally rescind Article 50 and maintain all the opt-outs that they've accrued over the last few decades and stay inside. That is not a realistic political option, is it?
Well, it depends on what you call realistic. When I'm looking at the British political class at the moment, in its vast majority, I see people who are a bit disconnected from reality. Indeed, what creates a difficulty is the legally binding character of the Good Friday Agreement. That is what needs, what makes it good that Northern Ireland will remain close to the EU, whatever form of Brexit. If the UK wants to stay united, then it's the whole UK that stays close to the European Union. No, I see politicians seeking reassurances. I'm concerned about citizens seeking reassurances, businesses seeking reassurances, and there's only two options on the table. Either Brexit on the basis of the withdrawal agreement or remain. And the ECJ said, if you want to remain, just send a letter to Brussels. Now, is there a political party in the United Kingdom prepared to do that? Well, neither of the big parties are prepared to do that. If they are not able, ask the people.
But there's another option, isn't there? There is the option of no deal at all. That can't be disqualified at the moment.
I would disqualify it on the grounds that the United Kingdom, by doing that, would unilaterally breach the Good Friday Agreement. By the way, also breach its legal obligations towards the European Union, because indeed, financial obligations have accrued over the years, which the United Kingdom has to fulfill. So if the UK wants to become a rogue state, then that's the way to go. But I do not believe that the majority of British citizens want their country signature to amount to nothing on the global stage.
People in this town and in Brussels are very discreet about a second referendum, a people's vote. Do you think that is now the only option for getting Parliament out of this mess?
The option that's on the table is the option we're trying to deal with. The idea of another vote, while I might welcome it and love it, we're different outcome than the first one, is for the British people. I have sympathy with what you're saying,
But are
Philippe,
you worried about the repercussions of that within
Britain? Let me just finish
Britain?
the point. Insofar as if the House of Commons, which is so united in its diversity that it cannot make a decision, and that's the logo here of Europe, but we are united in diversity, then perhaps the option is to ask the British people, but that's not our call. That is a call for the British Prime Minister. We can't make that decision.
Yes, but the deal that everyone keeps talking about, I mean, not everyone, Theresa May does and people in Brussels and Strasbourg, that deal is effectively dead, is it not?
Unless the British people decide that they are happy with that deal. Now, frankly speaking, if I were them, I would much prefer membership, because in terms of regaining control with membership, you sit at the table where decisions are made.
Do you think that Theresa May will even be Prime Minister when she goes to Brussels? I mean, there are people doubting that as well.
I won't speculate on this.
You won't speculate?
Yeah, I mean, nor would I speculate on it. I have to say she's shown great strength, although today it must have been a difficult moment to pull back from a vote which we all need to see happening in the House of Commons. I mean, the uncertainty is bad for everybody.
In the delicatessen shop of different options, you know, we had Canada plus, so some people are talking about EU minus. What about Norway plus? This is something else that's come up.
With respect to that question, can I settle the divorce first?
Yes.
And then we can talk about the future relationship. And that's what we've done. And that's what the British Prime Minister has negotiated. And she was happy with that agreement. She has failed to convince those who want a hard Brexit and those who want to remain that they should support this. So the problem is not here or us deciding what we would offer. It is that the deal on the table has got to be either ratified or what? And that is the question that we find difficult to answer.
Will we get some sort of certainty by Christmas? Yes or no?
I hope so, but that does not depend on the European Union, because either the United Kingdom says, after all, I want to remain. They will be welcome. Or they say we accept the withdrawal agreement and will support it as well.
I don't think we're going to have certainty before Christmas, and I say that with deep regret.
But with certainty, I'm afraid this interview's ended because we've run out of time. Thank you very much indeed, Maureen McGuinness, Philip Lambert. Thank you very much. Well, as you can see, an awful lot of politics and diplomacy going on, but it's really very difficult to ascertain where any of this is heading at the moment, other than back to you in London.
Thanks, Matt. Well, one party is crucial to Theresa May's future, and that's the party that she relies on to prop up her minority government, the Democratic Unionist Party. With me now is their Brexit spokesman, Sammy Wilson. Sammy, what does Theresa May need to get from the EU to secure your support for her deal?
Well, she currently has a deal which is legally binding, and that legal bind ensures that Northern Ireland will be tied to the EU single market and customs union and separated from the UK.
But she's
that
made quite
has
clear
to be taken out.
Okay, take out the backstop, but she's made clear that she believes and the EU believes it's essential to have it in there to deliver on the promises made in the Good Friday Agreement. So who's going to budge?
Well, I mean, first of all, if you approach negotiations in that way, you're never going to get anything anyhow. But secondly, it is not...
Isn't that how you approach negotiations?
No, it's not. And secondly, this is not essential to the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement doesn't actually mention the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. It doesn't mention the EU, other than that the EU would provide some money to support the Good Friday Agreement. So, this nonsense that she has introduced and allowed to be introduced, first of all, there's a problem along the border, which there's not. Trade can be facilitated across the border. And secondly, that somehow or other the Good Friday Agreement binds her hands is just not true.
But you know what is binding her hands is the EU on one side and you guys and the Brexiteers on the other. So something's got to give, hasn't it? What compromise will you make right now to enable Theresa May to get this deal?
We have already made the compromise, and in December of last year we said, okay, if the backstop is going to be there, here are certain safeguards we want to put in it. Either that there be a termination date, or secondly that the Stormont Assembly would have the final say on what regulations are imposed. She didn't even try to get those into the agreement
and
allowed
did
to be legally
today
binding.
in the Commons that she'd look at a way of enabling MPs to somehow sort of time limit the backstop in some way. Didn't that give you pause for thought?
No, because MPs could never, ever supersede the legally binding international agreement which the withdrawal agreement constitutes. MPs can vote all they want. They could dance up and down the aisles of Parliament. They could do somersaults through the chamber. It will not make any difference to the fact that legally that we would be obliged to stay within the customs union and the single market. And that's a fatal flaw in any assurances.
So we're completely stuck. Now, Jeremy Corbyn might well possibly table a motion of no confidence in the Prime Minister. Can she count on your support, the DUP support?
We have made it clear that until the government is committed to implementing a deal which will break up the United Kingdom and would hurt the Northern Ireland economy, we will continue to work with the government to seek to ensure that this deal is defeated and a deal which is good for the United Kingdom is put in place.
So there's a contradiction there. You want to kill her deal, and yet actually you're giving it oxygen by saying you'll support her in any no confidence
No,
motion.
we're not, because once at present she can't implement this deal. She can't implement this deal until it goes through Parliament. There's a stalemate at present. So it may well be the Prime Minister's intention to implement this deal. But as long as she is unable to do so, then we believe that we should keep this government alive to ensure that a policy is changed. And the only way you can get the policy changed is to ensure that the government doesn't fall.
Okay, but actually, you've threatened in the past to pull the plug on Theresa May's government. You've abstained on the budget vote and all sorts of things. But the reality is that you could never stomach Jeremy Corbyn in number 10, could you?
Well,
someone who's voted for the reunification of Ireland.
Can I make it quite clear? Well, this Prime Minister's deal would bring about the reunification of Ireland.
So you're indifferent whether it's Jeremy Corbyn or Theresa May
if we're going to be betrayed, it doesn't really matter whether it's Theresa May does it or Jeremy Corbyn does it. The one thing we will not do, however, is connive in our own betrayal. And that's why we have made it quite clear to the Prime Minister that if she gets this deal through Parliament and then tries to implement it, she will not do it with our support, and without our support she will not be able to get legislation through.
Sammy Wilson, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, the head of the CBI described the Brexit vote delay as yet another blow for companies desperate for clarity, as the news sent the pound crashing and left businesses in even more limbo, unsure of how to plan for the future. Our economics correspondent Helia Bahimi has this.
This is what stockpiling in Brexit looks like. 1.25 million Viagra tablets tucked away in a storeroom in Cheshire.
How many do we have in stock of those at the minute?
We've still got a few thousand of these left.
Right.
The government may be in disarray, but this pharmacy is determined to be ready, even if the Prime Minister is not.
So as you can see, we've built up a very large pile of medication for our 130,000 patients. We sell roughly 200,000 per month.
Robbie Tone's online pharmacy sells across the UK, but nearly all his drugs are manufactured in Europe.
It might seem a crazy amount, but in the past, in the pharmacy industry, stock can go short very, very quickly. I think it's a complete mess at the minute. Could you invest at the minute with this uncertainty in business? You couldn't. Would we be, doing massive growth plans at the minute? No, you'd be waiting to see what's going to happen. And I imagine that applies to all different sectors of the economy.
It's not just Viagra that's at risk. Many life-threatening illnesses rely on medication produced on the continent, which could be dangerously held up if we crash out of Europe. Latest figures show UK growth has come to a standstill, inching forward just 0.1% in October. Analysts described the figures as proof that the UK economy was being choked by Brexit uncertainty, with business investment stalled, housing transactions slowed, and manufacturing falling sharply.
Did you think Brexit could be a good idea?
To be honest, I did. I did buy into the spin. Looking at it now, as time has continued, and the massive uncertainty and, everything that's going on, I would just love it to go away. It would be, I think most people in business especially would love it to go away.
Today, markets balked at the political gridlock and the pound nosedived to levels not seen since April 2017. In the business world, there was exasperation that there is still no clarity.
One FTSE 100 chief executive told me they can no longer plan for Brexit because there are now too many variables. For them, their warehouse turns over stock every single week, so they can't stockpile, even if he wanted to. The risk, they say, is that empty supermarket shelves could lead to civil unrest, something he believes the government could not allow.
What the government has told small businesses today is that the future will not be decided before Christmas, that they themselves are not clear on what might happen in the new year, and that they're very sorry they can't actually give small businesses, the people who work for them, a date on which they will be clear. That's about as bad as it can get.
While the denizens of Westminster argue amongst themselves, Christmas cheer is looking more and more elusive. Even Santa may be losing hope that Brexit will deliver anything but coal in our stockings.
Back on an extraordinary day in Westminster again, so who better to comment on that than our political correspondent, Michael Crick. So tell us, where are we with the vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister? Is that going to materialise? By whom?
Well, not yet. Labour have pretty much made it clear they don't want to put down a vote of no confidence until the vote comes back to the House of Commons. Basically, they don't think they can win it right now, and that was reinforced by Sammy Wilson's comments to you earlier from the DUP, saying that they would back the government in the current circumstances. And on the figures, it's very difficult to see how the government would lose a vote of no confidence. Difficult to see Tory backbenchers actually voting against their own government. The other possibility, of course, which was raised by Ian Blackford, is the idea that the SNP might put down a vote of confidence, which would then put Labour on the spot. But I think there's a bit of a puzzlement within Labour about what to do. And of course, even if they were to bring down the government in a vote of no confidence and force a general election, actually Labour's not doing that well in the polls right now, remarkably. I was just looking at some figures for November. The average of the 7 polls for November has the Conservatives 1 point ahead. As for what the government will be doing, Mrs May is off to The Hague tomorrow to see Prime Minister Rutte as part of the start of her European tour to get some changes. Tomorrow MPs will be, instead of this massive debate, the biggest in our lifetimes, instead MPs tomorrow will be discussing Lord's amendments to the Ivory Bill. Nonetheless, Conservative MPs have been put on a 3-line whip from now until Thursday because they're frightened there may be some kind of ambush from the opposition.
And just very briefly, you've just come from the meeting of the ERG, the Tory Brexiteers. What is the state of the Conservative Party now?
Well, I mean, the big unknown at the moment is how many letters have gone in. They were very much burnt.
To topple
Theresa May, or at least have a vote of no confidence. There was all this talk a few weeks ago, it might be near the 48. They don't want to speculate now. They're very cagey about all of that. Jacob Rees-Mogg said, no discussion of leadership tonight. They did discuss the leadership. How far have they got? I mean, there must be letters, there must be MPs tonight thinking of it. It wouldn't surprise me if in the next few days they do reach the 48, because there must be a lot of letters in there that have gone in without the MPs announcing it, perhaps from people on the other side of the party, from Remainers as well as from Brexiteers.
Michael, thank you so much. And John, let's return to you now on the Green.
So whatever happened to voters just want to get on with it? Well, one backbench MP has just said Parliament should be prepared to sit through Christmas to resolve the deadlock. Just one point, and that is that the Cabinet tomorrow has been abandoned because the Prime Minister is going to be in Europe. But joining me now is Matthew Paris, seasoned columnist with The Times.
Hello.
Well, first of all, you were an MP for a time, you've been a columnist for years. Is this the most serious political crisis that you can recall?
Oh, absolutely. I can actually just about recall Suez. This is the most serious political crisis, I think, in my lifetime. All sorts of turbulence I've lived through in Parliament and out of it, but always I've had the idea that somebody knew what was going on. There was a plan. There is the impression now that nobody knows what's going on. There is no plan. It really is chaos.
Is this a failure of personnel in both the Conservative and the Labour parties?
I don't think it is. You know, everyone's blaming Theresa May or blaming Jeremy Corbyn, but the fact is that Britain was promised that we could leave the European Union on terms which would make us more comfortable than when we were in it. The EU was never going to allow that, and if the Archangel Gabriel had been Prime Minister, they might have presented it with a little more panache than she has done, but the Archangel Gabriel would face exactly the same conundrum, and that's what you saw this afternoon.
Is there a probability, a danger, whichever way you want to put it, of another referendum?
I think there is a possibility of another referendum, but I think the chaos has got to become more apparent before people will turn to that. There's a real reluctance.
But that could be chaos in and of itself, as Mrs May keeps saying.
Yes, it could. And there's a reluctance, having asked people once, to ask them again. And a referendum campaign would be a nasty business. But what else is there to do?
Well, was 48 to 52 bound to end in tears?
If there had been an easy way forward, I think people would have accepted 48 to 52. Well, the 52 win. It has proved there is no easy way forward. Indeed, it's proving there is no way forward at all, in which case the narrowness of the margin then really begins to chafe.
The extraordinary thing is that we're learning all sorts of things at this sort of 25th hour that we never knew before. That, for example, more money is spent on Northern Ireland than is spent on being a member of Europe.
Yes. Our net contribution to Europe is less than that to Northern Ireland. Nobody knew about, I think, the Good Friday agreements, arrangements with the border, or the promises made for the border. All those things we're now talking about over tea. We didn't know 2 years ago.
And one of the things people don't probably know is that the Northern Ireland Agreement itself is structurally bound into our membership of the European Union.
Yes, it is. And I noticed, I was interested in what a lot Theresa May made of that this afternoon. She didn't say that the backstop arrangement is just a regrettable necessity. It's an awful nuisance. We don't want it, but they've forced it on us. She actually made a principled case for a backstop arrangement, and at the same time as saying that she was going to try and negotiate some tweaks to it. Sounds to me as though she doesn't intend or believe that anything much more can be done.
Matthew, I'm going to put you on the mat. What's going to happen?
I think the 48 votes of no confidence in her leadership will happen in the next 2 weeks. Continuing the pantomime analogy which you started before the break, I think look behind you is the advice now to Mrs May.
What is that, Boris?
No, I don't think so. No.
Matthew Paris, thank you very much indeed.
Well, good evening from a febrile Westminster, where for weeks tomorrow had been billed as the historic moment where MPs got to have their meaningful vote on the Prime Minister's Brexit deal. Indeed, her ministers were still out and about mid-morning insisting it was going ahead. And then came a huge U-turn. This afternoon, the Prime Minister confirmed the rumours that had been sweeping this place, that the government was postponing the vote on her deal until, well, we don't know when. She acknowledged to MPs she couldn't win. Instead, she was going back to the EU to ask for reassurance on the Northern Irish backstop. If her position looks weaker than ever, Labour called for her to go, but said they're not quite ready to call a vote of no confidence.
Very unparliamentary behaviour by the Labour MP Lloyd Russell-Moyle. His protest at Theresa May shelving the big vote on her Brexit plan that was supposed to take place tomorrow.
Order. I must order the honourable gentleman to withdraw immediately from the House for the remainder of this day's sitting. Mr Russell-Moyle, please leave the chamber.
Just a few minutes earlier, an eccentric parliamentary convention.
Now, tomorrow!
That was the actual moment when the government backed away from the historic vote. Perhaps stranger still, it was hours earlier that the Prime Minister explained why MPs were being deprived of their say on her Brexit scheme.
It is clear that while there is broad support for many of the key aspects of the deal, on one issue, the Northern Ireland backstop, there remains widespread and deep concern. As a result, if we went ahead and held the vote tomorrow, the deal would be rejected by a significant margin. We will therefore defer the vote scheduled for tomorrow.
What does she do now?
I spoke to a number of EU leaders over the weekend, and in advance of the European Council, I will go to see my counterparts in other member states and the leadership of the Council and the Commission. I will discuss with them the clear concerns that this House has expressed.
She thinks and hopes she can persuade the European Union to give a stronger commitment that the so-called backstop, which some see as driving a wedge between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, and her critics say would seriously limit the UK's independence after Brexit. But
if the Prime Minister cannot be clear that she can and will renegotiate a deal, then she must make way. If she is, and Mr. Speaker, if she is going back to Brussels, then she needs to build a consensus in this House.
That parliamentary umpire again, not happy.
Halting the debate after no fewer than 164 colleagues have taken the trouble to contribute will be thought by many members of this House to be deeply discourteous.
But probably even more troubling for the Prime Minister was this from the leader of Northern Ireland's DUP MPs, without whose support she'll struggle to govern.
What the Prime Minister says today simply isn't credible, is it? I mean, this is an impossible position for the government to find itself in. The Prime Minister says she's listening, but she talks about reassurances and assurances. Does she not get it by now that the withdrawal agreement, legally binding text, is unacceptable to this House?
And then there was one of the great parliamentary veterans.
Mrs Thatcher had a word for it. What she's done today, F-R-I-T, she's frit.
Labour's leader came back.
The public, Mr. Speaker, will look at the behaviour of this government and how it treats their democratically elected representatives with despair.
And he won an emergency debate tomorrow. Now, what doubtless you'll point to is the many times the Prime Minister said this.
This is the best possible deal. It's the only possible deal. This is the deal that has been negotiated. There is not a better deal available. This is the deal.
Apparently not. Tonight she's preparing to meet European leaders to persuade them there is a better deal. And if she fails, as even her ministers fear she will, then a delayed vote simply means a day of reckoning for her, for the country, deferred. But not for long. Robert Peston, News at 10.
Well, Mrs May sets off on her tour of the EU in the morning. She's aiming to get enough concessions to change minds back here at Westminster. A pretty tall order. And if it doesn't come off, what happens then?
We're not gonna Brexit. No, we're gonna Brexit. We're not gonna Brexit anymore.
Tonight, as protesters sing a variation of the same old song, the question is, how does Theresa May change her tune? The lookalikes might think they're funny, but winning over real MPs is no joke. They want her action to be more than just a stunt.
The Prime Minister taking a flight to Brussels is not enough. It needs change to the text of the treaty, which states in Article 4 that it is superior law, and most importantly, it needs to remove the backstop altogether, lock, stock and barrel.
So what does she try next? Well, tomorrow's cabinet has been cancelled. Instead, the Prime Minister begins a tour of Europe. First stop in the morning, The Hague to meet the Dutch Prime Minister. Then on to Berlin to meet the German Chancellor. And then on Thursday, she'll see the rest of the EU in Brussels at a meeting of the European Council. With the only other date in the diary, Theresa May's promise to have a solution by January the 21st that'll need to be worth the wait to convince her many critics.
time is running out and she's wasting more time. She should accept the inevitable. This deal is a bad deal. It's not going to be supported in the House of Commons, and then get everybody onto a better path.
But tonight the cameras aren't capturing any agreement about what that path is, including among Labour. This evening, around 50 of its MPs have told Jeremy Corbyn to push for another referendum. Writing to him, the country cannot hold on any longer, and it is untenable to delay providing our party's support for a public vote at the earliest opportunity.
Let's get the deal that the Prime Minister has put together, whether it's amended or not, and I don't think it will be amended, to the people and say, would you like this deal or would you like to stay in the European Union? A perfectly democratic thing to do. It would take away all of the problems of the 2016 referendum, and in actual fact might even get the Prime Minister out of a hole.
This evening, a rush to hear some support. The Prime Minister who got us here backing the one who must get us out.
But I do support the Prime Minister in her efforts to try and have a close partnership with the European Union. That's the right thing to do, and she has my support.
But while Theresa May might have bought herself a little more time, you can almost hear the bells tolling for her tonight. Paul Brand, News at 10, Westminster.
If Mrs May is hoping the EU will help rescue her deal, she will not have been encouraged, though, by the European Council President Donald Tusk. He said the EU would not renegotiate, but they will now discuss Brexit at an EU summit later this week.
Just when Brussels thought its part in this endless Brexit drama was finally over, it seems the British are back. The Prime Minister's top negotiator, Ollie Robbins, was spotted in the Commission today, but the public message suggests his room for manoeuvre lies somewhere between limited and non-existent.
This deal is the best and only deal possible. We will not renegotiate. Our position has therefore not changed. And as far as we are concerned, the United Kingdom is leaving the European Union on the 29th of March 2019.
Council President Donald Tusk tweeted a slightly more conciliatory version of the same message. He'll host a special Brexit session at the summit on Thursday. But we will not renegotiate the deal, including the backstop, but we are ready to discuss how to facilitate UK ratification. In other words, a fig leaf, because the Irish government will not let the issue of the backstop go, and they still have the unwavering support of the other 26 in that demand.
The withdrawal agreement, including the Irish backstop, is the only agreement on the table. It took over a year and a half to negotiate. It has the support of 28 governments, and it's not possible to reopen any aspect of that agreement without reopening all aspects of it.
A short distance away in Luxembourg, the 28 judges of the European Court were delivering more news the government didn't want to hear. If Mrs May's deal collapses, the alternative isn't just no deal. They've ruled Britain can pull back from Brexit.
That article allows that member state to revoke that notification unilaterally in an unequivocal and unconditional manner.
The timing was no accident. These judges wanted MPs to know exactly what their options were before the meaningful vote. Well, even if that isn't happening, it is now clear in law that should Britain choose to do so through another Act of Parliament or a new referendum, it could stay in the EU under exactly the same terms as it has now. Entirely irrelevant, say the government, because that's the last thing they want to do.
If any British government were to delay leaving the EU on the 29th of March, I think people would be shocked and very angry, and it's certainly not the intention of the government.
But perhaps not surprisingly after today, people here aren't quite sure that it's still the government in charge of this process. James Mates, News at 10, Luxembourg.
Postponing tomorrow's vote here had an immediate impact on the value of the pound. There is nothing like uncertainty, of course, to spook the city. Sterling fell to its lowest level against the dollar and the euro for more than a year and a half. Our economics editor, Joel Hills, is in the city. So pretty worrying numbers, but just how significant was this, do you think, Joel?
Well, look, this wasn't panic, it wasn't meltdown, but it was significant. And I think what you'll see over the next few weeks and months is that the politics will play out regularly to the backdrop of a drumbeat of financial markets. And today, momentarily, their drums got a lot louder. The pound began to fall against the dollar at around 11 o'clock this morning when reports first surfaced that the vote would be delayed. The Prime Minister made the formal announcement in the Commons later by 3:30. By 4 o'clock, The pound was down to $1.25, the lowest level in 20 years on the stock market. Shares were being sold in the companies most exposed to the British economy, to the banks, to home builders, to retailers and to airlines. What does all this mean? Well, some analysts will tell you investors feel that there is a chance of economic downturn. Others will tell you the prospect of a general election and the possibility of a Labour government is what this reaction is all about. You'll find no one at all who honestly believes in the city that now the most likely outcome is a disorderly Brexit. The clear expectation is there will be some form of agreement that Britain will leave the European Union and that transition will be smooth. If that sentiment changes, expect the reaction on financial markets to get a lot more violent and to be almost impossible for politicians to ignore. What happens in the city may seem remote, alien and almost irrelevant to some people, but what happens matters, and the markets can force the hands of governments. They have done in the past.
Okay, Joel, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, I'm joined now by our political editor, Robert Peston. It's quite hard to know where to start tonight, really, isn't it? But, I mean, practically, what hope does Theresa May have of achieving what she's aiming to through this delay, do you think?
So what we will get, probably at the end of this week, is a solemn statement from EU leaders that they don't want this blooming backstop which would keep us in the customs territory in which its critics see as driving a wedge between Northern Ireland and Great Britain and restricting our independence. They don't want it to be more than very short-lived. But the problem is that political statement will not have the force of international law. Only the withdrawal agreement, which she's already signed up to, has the force of international law. And so her critics in her own party and the DUP, who she depends on, those MPs, those Northern Ireland MPs she depends on for her ability to govern, they will still vote against this plan as and when it comes back to Parliament. So the humiliation of the loss of the great parliamentary defeat hasn't now been eliminated, it has simply been deferred. Those are not my words, they are the words of her close colleagues, even those in cabinet.
OK, Robert, for the moment, thank you, and I'll be coming back to you a little later. Well, on another extraordinary day here at Westminster, let's return now to Brexit and our political editor, Robert Peston, for a final thought. It's hard to imagine a Prime Minister under greater pressure tonight, assailed from all sides, really.
So, I've been speaking to lots of Tory MPs tonight. They've only got one thing on her mind. Will Theresa May remain as Prime Minister? Should she remain as Prime Minister? Tory MPs, ministers feel humiliated. They were given one job, which was to deliver on Brexit, and the plan that the Prime Minister painstakingly negotiated over many, many months, she has now accepted, has failed. So this is the moment, this week, that if she is going to be ejected before that Brexit date of March the 29th, this is the moment.
It may be the moment, and lots of rumours swirling about what possible action she may have to face as well, from within and without.
Yeah, I mean, look, names are being gathered, and frankly, as I say, the only thing on the mind of her critics is, have they got the numbers? The magic number is 150. They don't think it's worth launching the no confidence vote unless they think they can get to that magic 150. They tell me they're close.
OK, we'll see what tomorrow brings. Robert, thank you very much, as ever, indeed, for that. So, according to Mrs May's original timetable, she should have been preparing tonight for tomorrow's big Commons vote on her Brexit deal. Instead, she's inside number 10, just a short hop from here, getting ready to fly to the Netherlands in the morning and then on to Germany to see Chancellor Merkel. She's hoping to win some leeway on that Northern Ireland backstop that would help her sell her deal to Parliament. She has bought herself some more time, but it is hard to see tonight how the outcome in the end will be any different when MPs do finally get their say.
It took 8 cabinet colleagues around 20 minutes to get the Prime Minister to do what she hadn't been able to do in weeks: recognise the scale of imminent disaster and delay tomorrow's meaningful vote. By the time she got to her feet this afternoon, she was telling the whole Parliament, perhaps an entire nation, what they already knew. There was silence from her own side, laughter from those opposite, as it gradually began to sink in. This deal she had sworn could not be changed or replaced now would be modified and delayed. Like Crossrail, it's coming, but no one knows when. What they do know is this, that a Prime Minister who'd taken every deal off the table but hers had to recognise that even hers, especially hers, could not garner the support of the country's lawmakers. What happens now? Our political editor, Nick Watt, is the lucky man tasked with that question.
Protests on the street, both sides digging in, and across the road in Parliament, a beleaguered Prime Minister pausing for breath or dear life in the face of overwhelming opposition.
It is clear that while there is broad support for many of the key aspects of the deal, on one issue, the Northern Ireland backstop, there remains widespread and deep concern. As a result, if we went ahead and held the vote tomorrow, the deal would be rejected by a significant margin. We will therefore defer the vote scheduled for tomorrow and not proceed to divide the House at this time.
The silence on her benches was unmistakable as Theresa May delayed the Brexit vote just hours after Number 10 had said the precise opposite. The contempt on the other side was unmissable.
Mr. Dennis Skinner.
Mrs. Thatcher had a word for it. What she's done today, F-R-I-T, she's fricked.
This was a wretched day for Theresa May, whose already diminished authority took a severe battering as she pressed the pause button to save her premiership. Loyalist ministers were downbeat, but putting on a brave face. One told me, at least the Prime Minister has a plan to seek some movement from the EU. There was despair and derision on all sides.
I don't believe the Prime Minister will come back with anything worthy because she hasn't approached these whole negotiations in a way that puts our country first. We haven't played our strongest hand, so the Prime Minister clearly isn't capable of doing that. So let's get a Prime Minister who can do it.
We are a laughingstock now on the international stage, an absolute laughingstock. Theresa May is weak as she goes in to negotiate even further. She's delaying the inevitable. The clock is ticking. Politics is broken. It's clearly broken. It's time to hand this back to the British people so we can get a decisive way forward.
People are just exasperated tonight in Westminster at the turn of events. Up until this morning, she was telling us it was the best deal possible, no change possible, sending ministers out across the country at the weekend, and now suddenly, yes, I'm going off to get a better deal, and the vote's been pulled. A sense of disbelief at how on earth the Prime Minister can even stand there and with a straight face pretend that, this is credible. To come to the House with a statement that basically justified the deal to a large extent, but we'll get a couple of assurances and everything will be all right. I mean, I hope I'm wrong, but I suspect that it won't be enough if that's what it amounts to. It needs to be, the backstop is poison in this withdrawal agreement, and that needs to be removed.
Supporters called for the Prime Minister to be given a chance.
If the deal is worth fighting for, and I think the deal is worth fighting for, then it's worth taking time to get it right. There's another European Council meeting at the end of this week. She's spent the weekend speaking to EU leaders, particularly about the point of the backstop. It's clear that some of my colleagues have got some concerns about that, and if we can get those concerns addressed, then I think that would be extremely helpful.
Tempers flared tonight when the government used a procedural device to delay tomorrow's vote.
The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Section 13(1)(b) of the European Union Withdrawal Act 2018, adjourn debate on question.
Now, tomorrow!
In protest, a Labour MP grabbed the ornamental mace, a symbol of royal authority in Parliament. It was soon back in its place. For now, Theresa May has survived the most dangerous moment of her premiership. She now hopes a mini-European tour will save her deal and her job.
Well, Nick is in central lobby for us. Nick, where do you sense this leaves her now?
Well, this was a truly dreadful day for Theresa May. To begin it, as Nigel Dodds was saying, absolutely adamant that this vote would go ahead, and then halfway through to have to postpone that vote. That is nothing short of humiliating. And one loyalist supporter of the Prime Minister said to me, this is getting a bit hairy. Her authority is ebbing away. Now, she does have a plan. She's postponed tomorrow morning's cabinet meeting to have breakfast with Mark Rutte, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, a traditional UK ally, and then she travels to Berlin to meet Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor. But the EU is very limited in what it can do. Donald Tusk, the European Council President, tonight he tweeted that the deal cannot be renegotiated. But he did say the EU would do what it could to help facilitate UK ratification of that deal.
And what do you think it can do? What's she hoping to take away from this tour?
Well, ministers know that they cannot change the wording of the legally binding withdrawal agreement, but I was speaking to one senior cabinet minister tonight who said that they're hoping to get a legal codicil, and what this would do is provide legal clarification of the most controversial element of the withdrawal agreement. That is the Northern Ireland backstop that's designed to prevent a hard border in Northern Ireland. And one loyalist who's trying and working with the government to support Theresa May on this says what she would have to get is an absolute guarantee that that backstop would end a year after it is triggered, if indeed it is triggered. But tonight I spoke to the European Research Group of Brexiteers, a senior source in that group, who said to me that would be utterly worthless because the withdrawal agreement would take legal precedence. And this person said, if you want the bulk of the European Research Group, very simple what the Prime Minister's got to do, get rid in its entirety of the Northern Ireland backstop.
Nick, thanks very much. So that's what Theresa May is expecting or hoping to get from this rather public delay. But could the backstop be altered? That is, the bit of her deal that stops there being a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic by keeping the UK in the customs union. And what made her change her mind today? Earlier I spoke to the International Trade Secretary, Liam Fox. Were you one of those voices advising her to delay this morning?
Well, I never, ever say what I say to the Prime Minister
Your
in
smile
private.
is saying it all.
I know, I just that I've had the question so often. But we do understand why our colleagues have this worry. And that's why I think the Prime Minister was right to say, fine, I will go back to the European Union and I'll make it very clear that parliamentarians have this. The alternative, if we're unable to get a withdrawal agreement, is either we have no Brexit, which I think would be an affront democratically, because it would mean that we were going against a specific instruction that Parliament was given by the voters in the referendum, or with no withdrawal agreement, leaving the European Union with no agreement whatsoever, which has all the problems that have been much rehearsed about potential economic disruption.
So what is she going to bring back then that is going to be so significantly different?
The initial view by the European Union in the negotiation was this must be a permanent backstop or it isn't a backstop. That view changed to the current negotiation, which is that both sides want it to be temporary. It's in the text several times that it should be temporary. In that case, can we find a way of giving both sides the reassurances they seek? Are there other ways of achieving the actual backstop itself?
So just to clarify, all she's going to find is a reassurance that doesn't change the legally binding document that you already have. Are you sure that's going to be enough for your colleagues?
No, my colleagues will want to see that their fears of being trapped in a backstop cannot be realised. That's the problem that we face. It's the problem
and you think that's going to come just with a letter of reassurance? That's going to be enough? Do you genuinely believe that?
Well, I think that there are a number of ways in which it can be achieved, but certainly we have to be clear that without the ability to genuinely reassure my colleagues that they could not legally be kept in the backstop against their will, it will be difficult to get this through the House of Commons.
Something just doesn't feel right, though, Dr. Fox. You're a traditional, staunch Brexiteer. Why are you OK with it when your colleagues aren't? When you hear Dominic Raab and David Davis and Boris Johnson saying they simply can't support this, are they wrong? Are they seeing something that you're not, or are you seeing something that they've got wrong?
My greatest fear is not getting Brexit at all. My greatest fear that is in a parliament that's got a majority of Remainers. We may end up with the changes that were made in the House of Commons last week with amendable motions, to find out that we get stuck in some kind of limbo where we're actually not able to leave the European Union.
Your phrase was, there's a real danger MPs may attempt to steal Brexit from the British people. That's an extraordinarily inflammatory thing to say. If you do not believe in parliamentary democracy, why are you an MP?
Because I fundamentally disagree with the premise of that question, if I may.
No, but it's your statement.
No.
You said MPs may attempt to steal Brexit from the British people.
Yes,
you think the MPs of Parliament are working against the British people? Is that what you truly believe?
Because I think on this issue, Parliament doesn't have the sovereignty it claims. Because my argument is that in that referendum, Parliament said, we will give this decision to the British people and we will abide by the decision of the British people. Then we had a general election. Both major parties said we will honour that decision by the British people. For Parliament now to turn around and say, by the way, we're going to ignore that decision, in my view, would be unthinkable.
I just wonder how that's helpful to the Prime Minister, your Prime Minister, when she's trying to bring people together within Parliament to support her deal, to have you saying that.
Her deal is to leave the European Union. The whole point is the British public voted to leave the EU. What do people not understand about that democratic wish?
What would you like to say to your colleagues who, as we speak, are working out ways to get rid of her?
My message would be that there is no clear majority in Parliament for anything other than the current deal with changes to the backstop. It seems to me this is the only thing that would be able to get through the House of Commons. If we can't get changes to the backstop, that may not be possible, in which case MPs, whether they will leave or remain, will have to confront that there's then only one of two options: no Brexit or no deal.
That was Liam Fox. Well, Sir Jonathan Fall was the most senior British official in the European Commission. Most recently, he was the Director General of the Task Force for Strategic Issues related to the UK referendum. Mairead McGuinness is the Vice President of the European Parliament. Very nice of you to join us both. Mairead McGuinness, is there any appetite, do you think, in Europe to throw the Prime Minister a bone at this point?
Well, what there is an appetite for is that we get this deal resolved and that there is a vote, a meaningful vote in the House of Commons. The idea of as you say, throw a bone to the Prime Minister is not language we would use, first of all. It's far too serious for that kind of language. What we would hope to do is try and assist the Prime Minister, but really it's out of our hands to some extent. When I listened to the debate last week and today in the House of Commons, frankly, I don't know how much flips we would have to do in the European Union to convince the different factions in the House of Commons to rally around this agreement. And can I say, when I hear people using very flippant comments about changing the backstop or dropping the backstop, I think there's a fundamental problem here, a lack of understanding. We started out very clearly, both the Prime Minister and the European Union, with an agenda which included making sure there was no hard border on the island of Ireland, and nothing has changed, and that's why the backstop is in place.
Can I just get you to simplify that? In terms of negotiation, sorry, in terms of negotiation, then there can be no change to the backstop. Is that what you're saying? Is that the message that you're sending out tonight?
Well, the message I'm sending out very clearly is that the withdrawal agreement has been agreed. And that's the whole purpose of it going back to the House of Commons. The problem fundamentally all along is that we've been negotiating with the UK, with the Prime Minister, in good faith, and she likewise, but she then had to go back and try and negotiate in the United Kingdom. And clearly there is a very confused debate in the United Kingdom about what different sides of the House want. And there are some very unholy alliances against this agreement. My concern is that for the constituents of Europe and the UK, we need to get this resolved.
Let me bring in Sir Jonathan.
Makes that really much more difficult.
Excuse me. Thanks. Let me just bring in Sir Jonathan Fall. Do you sense that Europe can move on this at all?
Could I just start by saying that I retired from the European Commission at the end of 2016, so I'm no longer a senior European official. Now, is there an appetite for change? I think there is no such appetite. The painstaking negotiations, more than a year and a half now, have gone into drawing up this withdrawal agreement. But there is confusion, there is misunderstanding, and therefore there might be scope for clarification. And that is what I think people are beginning to talk about. I think nobody wants to reopen the text of the legal agreement as already drawn up, but there may be a possibility to clarify some of its terms.
And do you sense that this is the position, not the lack of a deal, but this is the position that the EU would have wanted all along, to be the ones holding the cards, sending out very clear signals that it is really impossible to leave the EU?
No, that's another misunderstanding. I think there is no trap. All that language is entirely wrong. Everybody wants to get on with this. The EU and its 27 member countries have all sorts of burning issues to deal with, and they've concluded an agreement and they want to see it in place. Nobody's trapping. The backstop, nobody wants it ever to be used, but everybody, I thought, understood that it was necessary. We are squaring a circle here. The United Kingdom is leaving the customs union, as I understand the government's position, and the European rules on goods, and it's that customs union and those rules on goods which made the Irish border as open as it is today. So they have to be replaced by something. And until they're replaced by something, there has to be some bridge put in place to make sure that things continue to function normally. That's the idea of the backstop. But nobody wants it to be used. They'd rather have the full agreement negotiated quickly so that it's never necessary.
Give me a sense now of the timing of this vote. We know it can go as late as January the 21st. Is there anything that would stop it going even later to March?
Well, March the 29th is Brexit Day. And the focus at the moment, reasonably enough, is on what's going on in Westminster, but there are processes that have to be gone through on the European side as well. So every government in Europe will have to formalise its agreement, or a majority of them, but it's expected that they all will, and the European Parliament has to vote. All of that will take some time. So not to mention the preparations that individuals, businesses will have to make, are making already, in fact, as the March 29th deadline looms.
Mairead McGuinness, to you briefly, do you think the EU are worried either about seeing Theresa May fall now, or really about a no deal?
I think here in Europe what we're worried about is the lack of clarity on the UK side. And I mean, the internal politics of whether the Prime Minister survives or not obviously will complicate matters, but that's outside of our control. The only thing we can control is what we've agreed. And I hope that reassurances will be enough when the Prime Minister speaks to her colleagues around the table this week. My sense, though, from what I listened to today, is that there are very few people who will agree to the same reassurances. So how many reassurances will be required, and will they be valid, and will they make people change their mind? And on those things, I'm afraid there are no real answers, and that is a concern.
Thank you both very much. Thank you. Well, no sooner had Mrs May delayed her vote than some Labour MPs and peers, with the backing of the SNP's Nicola Sturgeon, were petitioning Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the largest opposition party in Westminster, to call for a vote of no confidence in Theresa May's government. The question of how the Labour leadership in particular responds to this extraordinary moment is a crucial one. And I asked Labour peer and former EU Trade Commissioner Peter Mandelson whether a motion of no confidence, a parliamentary device that hasn't been successful since 1979, was the right course of action for Labour to take.
I mean, I think the Labour Party, the Labour leadership, is facing a bit of a dilemma. I mean, they want to straddle and retain the support of the third of Labour voters who backed Leave in 2016 and the two-thirds of Labour voters who backed Remain, and they want to keep them both close. Well, what happens when you sort of, ride two horses like that? You end up doing the splits, and I think that is the risk for the Labour leadership. But I think there's also another dimension to this. I think the whole country wants to see the leadership of both parties, but including the Labour Party, showing leadership. And what they're getting instead is a sort of curious hesitancy the whole time. And I think people don't understand, why doesn't the Labour Party come out with real bite and lay a glove on what is an absolutely shambolic government? I mean, there's the government, the Tory party. They spend, 2 years negotiating with the European Union, the same amount of time arguing and negotiating with themselves. It seems to people looking in on this from outside that the only people the Tory party and the government don't fear is the opposition front bench, because they're not laying a glove on them. People don't understand this, and I think it really is a time people in the party, voters, supporters of the Labour Party, will be looking for real leadership.
The Labour front bench would say, this is the wrong deal, but put us in charge and we can negotiate a better deal. You know Brussels from inside. Is that possible at this point?
There is certainly room for manoeuvre on the EU's part, and they will change their approach to the negotiation if the red lines that Mrs May, in my view, stupidly imposed on this negotiation at the outset. She sort of dropped herself into a straitjacket from which she hasn't been able to sort of manoeuvre or gain any flexibility since. But if the red lines changed on Britain's part, then the negotiating approach would change on Europe's part.
And do you think that Labour would actually change those red lines? They're not going to soften on freedom of movement.
That's a question. That's a question. And if they want to maintain that rigidity, then I'm afraid the Labour Party has to accept that they're not going to get a fundamentally different deal from the one that's being offered to the Conservatives.
You've been in talks with John McDonnell and others about a second vote, a people's vote. Is he persuadable?
I can't speak for John McDonnell. I think he has a more open mind. But I also think that he's using his political judgment here. I think he's seeing where this is going. It is that the only way in which the country as a whole is going to be able to live with the final outcome of this whole Brexit saga.
Do you find them easy to work with? I mean, were they listening to your petition?
Yes, they do. They're perfectly prepared to engage in a discussion about all this. Yes, they are. But they also know that Jeremy appears to have a very, stiff resistance to changing his position on Brexit. But the truth is that events, public opinion, the whole landscape is changing around us all on Brexit. It's changed profoundly just in the last 24 hours. Most people will come to the conclusion that this has got to go back to the public in order to be signed off one way or the other.
Peter Mandelson, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm now joined by the Conservative MP Anna Soubry, who's campaigning for a people's vote, the former Director of Strategy at Number 10 and Theresa May, Chris Wilkins, and from the Labour Shadow Cabinet, Richard Bergen. And welcome to you all. Chris, where do you think it started to go wrong, this? Because this is the end of the first bit, but it isn't a surprise that it's ended up like this, right?
I don't think it is a surprise. I think, where did it start to go wrong? I think it was actually quite some time back, because in my view is that the deal that the Prime Minister has come back with from Brussels is not particularly a surprise. Most of the details of it I think, could have been predicted, and really the point is that I would have expected the government to have been spending a number of months now really building a coalition of support to get this deal through Parliament, and I think had they reached out to certain maybe more centrist members of the Conservative Party and equally some moderate members of the Labour Party, then they might have been able to build that coalition support. But having not done that and having really tried to do that over the course of maybe a week to 10 days, they just didn't have enough time to pull it together.
We'll bring in the centrist members in a moment, but you heard Peter Mandelson talk about this straitjacket of red lines that she had emerged with from Lancaster House, whether it was an end to freedom of movement, an end to the customs union, an end to the single market. That was it, wasn't it? I mean, at that point, she'd stopped being able to bridge any gap.
Well, I actually don't accept that view. This talk of red lines is something that people use often now, but actually, if you look back at the Lancaster House speech, it was a more flexible, nuanced speech than people now remember, and certainly the language got harder when we went through the election in the manifesto and things like that.
It was citizens of nowhere, wasn't it? It was a sense that if you weren't sort of feeling properly...
That was before Lancaster.
Right.
I think people sort of cherry-pick bits of that. The view that the Prime Minister took from the start was firstly that she wanted a deal from Europe which was a bespoke deal, something unique for the United Kingdom, and the deal she's presented now is precisely that. And she also wanted a deal that meant that we took back control of our borders, our money and our laws, and again, this deal achieves that. Now, I think it's perfectly consistent with that. The problem is the backstop.
It doesn't, because we haven't got a deal. We've got a withdrawal agreement, and we've got this wretched backstop which doesn't please anybody and it really does concern everybody. But we haven't got the deal. We don't know what the future relationship is going to be. And I think that's, again, something that we completely forget in all of this, is that, Theresa did say that there would be some bespoke deal. This is for the birds. There was never going to be a bespoke deal. In fact, we've got no deal. And it is this blindfolded Brexit that we predicted. But where Chris is absolutely right was that the profound mistake that she made was that she never reached out across her own benches, as I said in the House today, across Parliament and across the country from the outset. So what she should have done...
out to the Remainers, to the 48%.
To the 40, but also across party as well, to find the consensus before she put down her red lines. And in my experience, my God, they are red lines which she won't even blur. And then you start your negotiations, knowing where we all are. So when you've done it, yes, you come back to the House, but what she's done is done her own thing and come back to the House, and everybody is pickled off.
I want you just to step back and tell me where you think today leaves us. Do you think Brexit is more likely or less likely? Do you think this is a good day for you?
I don't know, because the journey that the People's Vote has been on, which started off in March with about 2 cats and a dog, me, Chuka, some other people like Caroline Lucas from the Green Party, I think we made page 5 of The Guardian after we launched it, is now right here at the heart, because I genuinely, honestly do not know how we are going to get out of this unholy, appalling, embarrassing mess other than a People's Vote. And I can just say this, Emily, if it's bad enough in our party, and it's dreadful, and this government is letting us all down, but my God, the state the opposition is in, open goals all over the place. We don't know whether they're Arthur or
Chris, let me just
Martha.
ask you, what do you think it was like in Downing Street this morning? I mean, you've been there, you will have seen the sort of the wheels coming off, as it were. Do you think she was pressured into dropping it? Why would she send out Michael Gove on the airways? Why would she send out Alan Duncan? All these people were literally caught in the headlights.
Well, indeed, and I can't particularly explain that. I mean, I was the same myself. I've been sort of talking on the media and I was asked yesterday about it, but I think she probably was fully determined in her own mind to have the moment in Parliament. But clearly, I think the whips presented that the key to this was getting Tory MPs to abstain rather than vote against. And I think probably clearly they presented this morning the fact they hadn't achieved that. People were determined to actually vote against, and therefore the numbers were just far too much.
Richard, I know you don't want to debate with the others, but let me just bring you in at this point. It is critical what Labour does now. You heard Lord Mandelson, who you may not always feel on the same side of, but his point was that you're riding 2 horses. You're going to end up in the middle somewhere in a pretty painful position. You've got to choose, haven't you now?
Well, we want to bring the country together. Labour's proposal for a Brexit deal of a permanent customs union, a strong single market relationship, and no reduction in workers' rights, consumer protections or environmental protections can command a majority in the House of Commons, but also bring people together, both those who voted Leave and those who voted Remain.
I don't think anyone doesn't want to bring the country together at the moment. I mean, you could put those words in Theresa May's mouth.
I don't think so, because Theresa May actually is holding or attempting to hold the country to ransom, because at the same time she's saying to Leavers, it's either my rotten deal or Remain. She's also saying to Remainers, it's my rotten deal or a catastrophic no-deal Brexit. So actually, we're the only party that represents both communities that voted Leave and Remain. So we want a common-sense compromise that brings people together.
Look where you are, though. I mean, today you had a perfect opportunity. You heard straight away Nicola Sturgeon come out and call on Jeremy Corbyn to table a vote of no confidence. You've had Labour MPs, you've had Labour peers, and you're still shilly-shallying around. As Peter Mandelson said, you haven't laid a glove on what is a shambolic government.
Not at all. The reason that the government pulled the vote today, after they lost 3 votes last week, after they tried to hide the legal advice last week, after they got found in contempt of Parliament last week, the reason they pulled that vote in such a humiliating way is because they knew that the opposition was going to defeat them. That's why Theresa May's kicked the can down the road. And as for a vote of no confidence that you mention, we want to bring such a vote when it has the maximum chance of defeating this government. We were saying before that we would bring it after she lost her vote on her rotten deal.
Anna Soubry's laughing at you.
Well, it isn't funny. but they're a complete joke, the opposition. And in this time of absolute national crisis, when you need a good, strong opposition to challenge government, to help in a way, to see if there's a way through things, I mean, Corbyn and the rest of that front bench are an absolute disgrace. Why haven't they talked about any move, by way of example, to have a vote of no confidence? That's one of the first things you'd expect from a leader of opposition. I say bring it on. I'll be supporting the government.
She's the opposition.
As will. Yes, we're
Richard,
damn
she's
sight
the
more
opposition. That's the
effective than
voice of
they've been.
opposition in the studio, isn't it?
No, because for all the kind of hawking of her principal conscience around the TV studios, when push comes to shove, Anna Soubry has supported all the attacks on working class communities and all their diversity. That's the reality.
We're talking about Brexit, man. This
all
is the
these
most
things
important
are connected.
decision this country's made since
all
the
these
Second
things are
World
connected.
War. Come on, grow up. Show some leadership. When you're going to table your motion of no confidence in the government and deliver on your conference decision to call a people's vote, when are you going to do those things and act in a responsible manner?
Let's let him answer.
As I've said already, we will be able to bring a motion of no confidence after Theresa May, which I anticipate will be sooner rather than later, has lost a vote in Parliament on her rotten deal. People weren't demanding that we brought the vote earlier today before the vote that she'd scheduled on her rotten deal. So it's strange that people are demanding it now. But as for our conference policy, that's quite clear that there's a sequence of events to run through. And our main interest, our primary interest, is one, stopping Theresa May's rotten deal, two, stopping a disastrous no-deal Brexit.
Okay.
And of course, our preference is for a general election, so people like Anna Soubry and Theresa May can put their record to the public, not only on the mess they made of Brexit, but also on the damage they've done to our
Let me bring in
communities.
Chris Wilkins. I wonder whether Theresa May has reordered her priorities today. I mean, she's gone to Brussels. Obviously, she wants to bring back whatever it is, the letter of reassurance. If she can't, would she move, do you think, on a people's vote? Would she move on any of the other options? Would she prefer to resign than do that? I mean, you know the woman, the bloody difficult woman who can either be incredibly, hard-working or intransigent, depending on sort of which side of the coin you flip.
From your point of view. It's difficult, isn't it? If you looked at her statement today, she had pretty definitive arguments against sort of all the other options, and clearly trying to say, it's my deal or nothing. And I think it's right she should try a renegotiation with Brussels and bring that back. But to answer your question directly, I think there are no good options here, really. They all have downsides, and if you look at them, you can really sort of see where the demerits are. Do you think she'd die on the sword,
though, is what I'm saying, rather than take anything else on?
No, I don't. I think she's determined to find a resolution to this, and I think, if I were there now advising her and looking at all the options and say there are no good ones, I think that the sort of second referendum is the way that she would have to go, because she's made this ultimately about she's trying to deliver on the will of the people, and that's how she set up this whole thing. So actually the logical consequence of that is if you can't get your deal through, you have to go back to the people.
Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.